We're here with Medal of Honor recipient Colonel Jack Jacobs to understand the experiences of being a Medal of Honor recipient, the importance of service, and what Veterans Day means.
Good evening.
Great
Citizens.
Down and out.
Never surrender.
He's done it.
Famous victory. We're going to come back.
Turn to glory.
Why don't we start off at the end and talk a little bit about what Veterans Day means to you as a veteran all these years, what, 2-3 years after you've retired now?
No, I retired from the Army in 1987. So, I mean, I can't even do the math. It's so
We'll just
long.
Stick to several.
Yeah, several years. To the extent that I grew up at all, I grew up right after the war. Matter of fact, I was born during the Second World War while my father was overseas. And when he came back from fighting in New Guinea and the Philippines, when the war was over, I was already 8 or 9 months old. Everybody in my neighborhood, I was in New York, their fathers had served. I had friends who had no fathers at all because they'd been killed in action. So the environment was one of service to the country. And we had something like 18 or 19 million people in uniform during the Second World War. So it was unusual to find some household that had not made a contribution to the defense of the Republic. Now we live in a completely different environment. Most Americans don't know anybody in uniform. And those of us who served, I served 20 years, started serving 20 years after the Second World War was over. We still had a draft. So there were lots and lots of people who served. But we all came to the same conclusion, whether we volunteered or dragged dragoon kicking and screaming into uniform, when we got to be older and recognized the importance of service. Those of us who spend time in the crucible of combat know the cost of freedom. And every Veterans Day, we think about it. Although somebody asked me not long ago, what do you think about on Veterans Day? I said, think about the same stuff I think about every day. The value of freedom, the cost of freedom, and the friends I've lost.
That's an incredible introduction of understanding. Do you feel that today the younger generations are missing that understanding to an extent of what the sacrifice actually means? They've seen it in movies, but don't have that connection.
Well, they don't have the connection because they don't serve. I think we've made a big mistake having a volunteer force. It was politically expedient and remains politically expedient. But I believe strongly that if you're lucky enough to live in a free country, you owe it something in the form of service. We've made it easy for people to shirk service by, I guess, outsourcing the defense of the country to a very small number of young people who are willing to do it, not recognizing that right now there are people out there making it easy for us to have a good time. That's not the way you're supposed to run an environment in which you have freedom, because the cost ultimately will be much, much higher than national service. You're looking at somebody who believes in national service. I think it's logistically easy to do. There are schemes you can enact, which will work logistically and administratively, but we don't have the political will. Here, I'll give you something to think about. More people were killed in New York City on 9/11 than were killed at Pearl Harbor. On the 8th of December, 1941, hundreds of thousands of young people streamed to reception stations all around the country to go defend the Republic. And by the way, this was in the wake of a period of isolation when even the President of the United States said, we're not going to fight. I hate war. Eleanor, his wife, hates war. He said in one of his fireside chats, Roosevelt, Fala hates war. You know who Fala was? His dog. So there was this perception that European boys will fight in Europe, Asian boys will fight in Asia, and we're isolated from. But yet, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was a groundswell of opinion to go defend the country and how important it was to defend. Hawaii didn't even become a state till I was in high school. But like I said, we had 17, 18 million people under arms during the Second World War. And that generation, my father's generation, saved the world. Today, there's no connection whatsoever. And I think it's extremely dangerous when a wide gulf opens up between those who are serving and those who are being served. You take freedom and everything that comes with it with a complacency that's extremely dangerous and may ultimately come back to bite us.
So when you talk about that gap between those who serve and those who reap the rewards of service, many of those who reap the rewards don't quite comprehend or might have the question of what is needed to protect and what is the dangers out there that look at our freedom and want to take it away. How much did you understand that in your time when you decided to go that you're seeing dissipate today?
Well, there are two things that come immediately to mind. One is something I already mentioned, and that is that when I was graduated from university, the shadow of the Second World War still loomed very large. And that there was an understanding that you had to pay some price for freedom. You could argue strenuously and sometimes probably persuasively that the wars in which we were involved, particularly the one in Vietnam, were not existential, and there was no reason for us to go to Vietnam and all. I mean, that's a geopolitical argument that is easy to make, but certainly in retrospect, almost everything is easy. Every argument is easy to make in retrospect. But at the time, the large majority of us who served recognized that that there was something afoot that was dangerous to the national security of the United States, and not just directly necessarily, but to our political interests around the world, and we needed to address them. And then, by the way, nobody else could address them because nobody else was strong enough. As an aside, I can tell you, nobody else is strong enough now. We need to recognize that too. The second thing was the general notion of service and sacrifice, because we had experience, the nation had experience, recognizing how important it was to defend itself, even if it had to be defended at a great distance. So among those of us who served, and by the way, more than 50% of the people who served during the war in Vietnam volunteered for it. And now, again, in retrospect, when they get to be my age, they're so proud at having served, even those who didn't much like the idea of being in uniform or of getting shot at, which nobody likes very much. But the general perception that we had an obligation to do it. And it was kind of a spillover from the Second World War and the aftermath of the war, which completely changed to the extent that there was the balance of power in the world.
You talk about that geopolitical war of Vietnam. And you obviously served there. When you were there, what was the perspective of those who you were defending and those who you were fighting for, meaning the Vietnamese?
Well, it's very interesting. I was, unlike most people, I was with the Vietnamese. I was embedded in a Vietnamese unit as an advisor with a few other Americans. Most Americans who served in Vietnam were with American units. And we have a tendency when we go to war to bring America with us. So they lived on compounds. They had hot food and showers and so on. Those of us who were advisors or in special forces and other missions, but we didn't have any of that stuff. We ate dehydrated rice that was made barely palatable by mixing it with pond water that had been rendered more or less safe by putting iodine tablets in it and so on. So we had a completely different life. Our view as advisors was very much different than the view of Americans who were in American units. And both of my deployments to Vietnam were with Vietnamese units. Because we were embedded with the Vietnamese, and many of us spoke Vietnamese as a result of it, Our view was completely different, and our perception was a mixture of affinity for the people we were serving with. Don't forget they're our comrades. We're in the crucible of war, and we're fighting we depend on each other and so on. And on the other hand, the inability of the Vietnamese to learn the lessons that they needed to in order to defend themselves. I have to say, as an aside, a lot of the worst tactical lessons the Vietnamese army learned, they learned from us.
In what sort of way?
Well, for example, it contacted the enemy, the Viet Cong of the North Vietnamese army, and then pulled back, called in artillery and airstrikes, bombed the bad guys, and then left, and not recognizing that this is a riff on Seinfeld when he's trying to get a mid-sized car. They don't have a mid-sized car for him.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have no midsize available at the moment.
I don't understand. I made a reservation. Do you have my reservation?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we ran out of cars.
But the reservation keeps the car here. That's why you have the reservation.
I know why we have reservations.
I don't think you do. If you did, I'd have a car. See, you know how to take the reservation, you just don't know how to hold the reservation. And that's really the most important part of the reservation, the holding. Anybody can just take them.
We taught them to take terrain, but we never taught them how important it was to hold terrain. And holding terrain and holding sway over the population and governing them, that's the most important thing. We taught them not to do that. We had a policy of counting corpses. If the bad guys lost more people than we did, then we won. And in 1975, when the North Vietnamese streamed down to take over the rest of Vietnam, we recognized how vacant that strategy was. If you want to control a population, if you want to govern, you have to control the terrain too. And to the extent that you don't do that, you're going to lose. We taught them that. We taught them to do all the worst things. Again, in retrospect, it was a very bad idea. But those of us who were with the Vietnamese, and we were at the bottom of the food chain, we recognized that long before everybody else did, because we were in the midst of trying to control Vietnamese terrain and failed miserably because that wasn't the policy.
Can you talk a little bit, for those who haven't come in contact with the difficulties of defending freedom, what that experience is like, and basically understanding a little bit of what it actually means to fight?
Well, at one level of analysis, you have to give up everything to which you become accustomed in order to become part of the mechanism that defends everybody else. You know, you put on a uniform, you lose most of your freedoms. If you're overseas in an American unit, you can't get married unless you ask your commander's permission. You can't go anywhere unless you have a pass, and so on. You have to recognize that you're told what to do, and you have to abide by a panoply of rules and regulations which may be alien to you, especially if you've lived a life of ease, being able to do whatever the heck you wanted to do, funded by somebody else. That the world's not like that. Not there. If you're going to have to make a contribution to the defense of your country, you're going to give all that stuff up. But it's a small price to pay to ensure that not just you, but everybody else has the freedom to do whatever he wants afterwards. The second thing to keep in mind is that you're and this is a positive aspect of it, you're going to be in a very small community of people who all have the same mission, and all of whom, and this is really most important, depend on each other for everything. When you hear of people performing valorous acts in combat, if they've survived and you ask them why did they do that, they'll all tell you the same thing, whether they were recognized for it or not. They would say things like, I did it for them because I knew if the situation were reversed, they'd do it for me. And I'm constantly reminded of, in thinking about all this, the observation of Hillel, who said, if not you, who? And if not now, when? If you're not going to do it, who's going to do it? There's a sense of shared privation, but also a sense of shared support that comes of being in a military unit and being in a difficult combat situation that you can't duplicate anywhere else. And I think the third thing that comes to mind, and one of the things that motivates people to serve, whether it's the first thing they think of when they first go into the service, or it's the last thing they think of when they think about why they joined. They may have joined because they needed a job or something like that. And that is, they're part of something much bigger than themselves. And I think, especially when you get older, nothing gives you more satisfaction of knowing that you are recognizing that you're nobody. I mean, you're somebody to somebody else. But in the giant scheme of things, the only way that you can reach into the future is to be part of something much larger than yourself. And that's what we're missing when we don't have people serve. When
you talk about that under pressure situation and how you have to react to it, perhaps for the analogy of how you received your Medal of Honor award, or perhaps in another way, are you able to talk a little bit on the mindset of when you're under fire, having to take the helm of responsibility and make decisions that are quite literally life or death?
It's interesting. Somebody asked me one time, were you scared? And I think about it a little bit, and I came to the conclusion, and I told them I was always scared. I mean, when people are ardently trying to kill you, if you're not scared, there's something, you need to have your head examined.
That's good whiskey.
Well, that's right. Or if you say after the fact, no, I wasn't scared, then you're either lying or you're mentally deranged, or perhaps both. So, no, I was always scared in combat. And when I wasn't in combat, I was scared I would soon be in combat. But fear is a very interesting thing. For most people believe that if you're really scared, it freezes you and that's the end of it. But that's not how it really works. For most people, not all, but for most people, even those who are worried about how they might perform in a situation in combat where, it's really dangerous and you're liable, if not likely, to get killed or wounded. It's a galvanizing a variable. It makes you, and I've spoken a lot. I've been in combat. I've spoken to a lot of other people in combat. It makes you do things that you otherwise wouldn't do. Now, one of the reasons is you're with your buddies. You depend on them. They depend on you. And if you've come to the conclusion that you're the only person who can perform a certain act, then you're gonna go ahead and do it. Because, like I said, they'll do it for you if the situation were reversed, particularly if a lot of people are killed and wounded. But I think the whole notion of fear in civilian life is very much different than its effect in combat. It welds units together and causes people to do things they would never think that they would be able to do. And that's why in combat, in particularly difficult circumstances, ordinary people do really extraordinary things.
Are you able to take yourself back and give a bit of a almost play-by-play on the mindset and the moments when you realize that you had to take on bigger responsibilities and you had to shrug off the fear to do certain things during the instance that was your Medal of Honor?
Oh, sure. I mean, I had been in a lot of combat before that.
Well,
in a lot of difficult circumstances before that, and the same thing happened. I did something, or my NCO did something, or other soldiers in the unit did something, which turned the tide of the tactical battle. I mean, you're not thinking about geopolitics when you're in the middle of a firefight, your friends are killed or wounded, and you're about ready to get overrun, or you have an opportunity to eliminate the enemy and give your unit a success, tactical success they otherwise wouldn't have. That happens every day in combat. You know, it's interesting about not just the Medal of Honor, but any act of valor. Think about what it takes to be recognized for a valorous award. Somebody has to see it. You have to do something. They have to be able to write, and they can't hate you. Those are the 4 requirements. So think about all the people who performed valiantly and nobody saw it. Or people did see it, but they themselves were killed. There were no witnesses. Or what happens from time to time, people did see it and they wrote it up or reported it, and for one reason or other, either accidentally or sometimes on purpose, the recommendations were destroyed or lost. And you realize that when somebody is recognized for a valorous act in combat, he's not representing what he did. He's representing the actions of all those who weren't recognized, particularly those who never came back. And that's why, in particular, Medal of Honor recipients will say that they don't wear the medal for themselves. They wear it for all those who can't.
That's a beautiful sentiment. And on that note of those, I want to try to understand a little bit what, if you can remember the moments when you shifted into gear from that. It could have been a split second or 10 seconds or I have to, but this is happening. I have to.
No, it was a split second. It was a split second, and that happens all the time, every day in combat. You have to make a split second decision. We had walked into a giant ambush that the enemy had set over a period of 3 days. We'd been fighting them. This is just after the Tet Offensive in '68. And then they broke contact, and the enemy had 3 days to put together this giant L-shaped ambush. Our scout platoon, which was supposed to be screening to the front, was not in sight. To this day, 50 some odd years later, I can't tell you where they were, but I can tell you where they were not. They were not in front of us where they were supposed to be. And you know, you're supposed to contact the enemy with the smallest possible force so that you maintain your flexibility and your optionality, and you can then maneuver around. You don't want your main force decisively engaged. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And the enemy let us get to within about 50 meters of their position before they sprung the ambush. We had a significant portion of our 2 lead companies. I and my NCO were accompanying the 2 lead companies, were killed or wounded in the first 10, 15 seconds of the battle. And it turned out to be a split second. I mean, everybody was either killed or wounded. And we're in a very difficult position in open terrain and lots of, you just make a decision. But you don't think about it, really. Don't forget you rely on your training, but most of all, you rely on the instinct that somebody's got to do something. I mean, it was a genuine crisis. You know what a crisis is? We overuse the term crisis all the time. I used to work for a guy who said everything's a crisis. If everything's a crisis, then nothing's a crisis. A crisis is a very specific circumstance. Things are bad. They're getting worse. Something has to be done. Has to be done right now. And if it isn't done right now, it's all going down the drain. There are very few circumstances that are like that. Not surprisingly, most of them occur in combat. And so people all the time are making split-second decisions because they instinctively recognize that this is a crisis. Something has to be done. Nobody else can do it, and I better do it. And that's exactly what happens in combat.
In those moments, we often hear the line, "There are no atheists in a foxhole." Do you think about God, or did you think about God throughout those periods?
No. I mean, I think at a time like that, you don't have the luxury of thinking about anything. And if you ask most people who've been in combat, they weren't thinking about anything anytime when it was a life or death situation. God gives us the opportunity to act, and it's up to us to act. I mean, we have the He doesn't have the responsibility. We have the responsibility. I remember I'm getting this wrong properly. Maybe it was Hermann Hesse. He's on his deathbed, and somebody said, "You're now going to ask God forgiveness." He said, "No, God will forgive me. That's his job." On Yom Kippur, God's going to forgive us. We don't have to square things with God, but we have to make sure that we square things with our fellow man against whom we've transgressed. We got to fix that. And it's a very Yiddish way of looking at things. I mean, nothing makes you a better Jew than being in combat, because you're thinking about your fellows. That's what you're thinking about, and that's what God wants.
You mentioned the Yiddish cop and being a Jew in combat. Was being a Jew a factor that you felt over there with your fellow troops? And also, did the Yiddish cop come into play at times where you were able to think in a critically different way because of your upbringing?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So I was with the Vietnamese. My NCOs were both Catholic. Matter of fact, my boss, Major John Nolan, they were all Catholics. My unit was mostly Buddhists or animists, and some Catholics. The senior non-commissioned officers and officers were Catholics. It was kind of a polyglot organization, but it's really kind of interesting about thinking like a Jew. Let me back up a second. I was a first lieutenant, a relatively low-ranking officer, advising a lieutenant colonel who'd been fighting in Vietnam for 20 years and had all this experience and so on. But it's interesting to note that most of the time when I gave him advice, he wasn't going to listen to it. Even though it was good advice, I can give you lots of instances when what I told him made great tactical sense, but he didn't want to do it for a wide variety of reasons. It took more effort. If it didn't work, he'd get fired, and all these political considerations I had no interest in, that he had to think about all the time, or he felt he had to think about all the time. But most of the instances in which I gave him some advice, and he thought it was a great idea and took it, the risks notwithstanding, were all because I was thinking like a Jew. And I explained to him, this is why I think what I think. Because if you do this, this is going to happen. But if you do this, here are the reasons why it's going to work. And even if it doesn't work, why it's a good idea. It was all a Yiddish way of thinking. And the majority of the times he took my advice, it was because I thought like that. And I convinced him to think like that too. So you had a Catholic lieutenant colonel, a Vietnamese thinking like a Jew. That was my great success.
You taught them how to think like a Gemara.
Exactly. It worked a treat.
On the religion topic, were you able to celebrate any aspects of your Judaism, or were you at that stage in life that you were trying to do those kind of things while over there?
Well, I couldn't. No time to celebrate.
No, when I mean like
all the time.
Observe Yom Kippur or
couldn't do
wrap
that.
the pair to fill in on, or
couldn't do that. We're in the field 100% of the time, fighting the enemy 100% of the time. Most American units did not do that. They would go out into the field. They'd come back to base camp. You could celebrate holidays. There were lots of opportunities for downtime. We were in combat very nearly continuously, and I certainly could think about what my responsibilities were, particularly on holidays. But I thought about them in the larger sense, what my obligation was as an American, as a soldier, and as a Jew. I thought about that all the time, not just on holidays.
That's interesting because one of the things that today, of course, the Aleph Institute work very hard with the chaplains to ensure that every Jewish service member can have that experience of going somewhere to have a Pesach Seder or so on and so forth. But seldom are people in that situation now where they're in constant war situations and having to non-stop be in the field. What was that experience like when you realized you went out there and maybe didn't know how long you were going to be out there for, and then as those months went on, can you talk a little bit about what that did to your psyche, or what your thought process was, or was there nothing, just get the job done?
Well, it was that, but it sort of reinforced my long-held notion that what you believe is in your head and your heart. It's satisfying to participate in the external, I don't mean trappings pejoratively at all, but it's really satisfying to be able to participate when you have the opportunity to participate with other Jews in the kinds of things that have been part of your life ever since you were young. But in the end, when you're in a difficult position, particularly like we were in combat all the time, it was just as satisfying to recognize. It was sort of a revelation that Judaism is in my heart and in my head, and to know that I can rely on that. You have no idea how satisfying it is. And though I missed being part of the rites of being a Jew, I was very satisfied knowing that it was inside me. It's very difficult to describe, but those of us who spent time in combat know that that's absolutely true.
The last sort of thought on the Jewish aspect is when you received your Medal of Honor, obviously with a name like Yaakov Jacobs, it's
Yaakov Ben David.
Well, there we go. It's very clearly a Jewish name, and the papers are gonna write about it, and very much representing the Jewish community, whether you wanted to or not. So in those moments, did you think about that aspect of representation?
Yes, but after the fact, it wasn't something that. Don't forget, a lot of people who served, and a lot of people who serve now, they go in when their obligation is over, they get out. So they serve, but they're really civilians most of the time. And then you have to put up with the transition from being part of something bigger than yourself to being on your own, more or less, which for many people is very, very difficult in the current environment when most people don't serve, and almost everybody you meet does. Nobody has the same experience you do. When I was in, I stayed in the Army. I was supposed to serve for 3 years. My obligation was up after 3 years, but I stayed. But I stayed because I really loved the people and I didn't want to leave them. And today, when people ask me, what do I miss most about the Army? It's the people. I love being around people who have served. I love people who are serving. I always feel better when I'm around them. And so when I came back from Vietnam, and later on when I was decorated, I was still in a military environment. And so I thought of myself primarily as a soldier. Plenty of Jews still in the Army too, with services and all the rest that served with them. Thought about overtly thinking about being a Jew, which is something I do all the time anyway, just sort of instinctively. More so when on Shabbat and holidays than usual, but it didn't make a difference to me because I was a soldier. And by the way, so were they. When I taught at West Point, with which you are very familiar, I'll put things in a proper perspective. We have a lovely chapel there. After enormous effort, over a long period of time, when I was teaching at West Point, when I was a captain and a major in the mid-1970s, and we had Shabbat services in Bartlett Hall, in a chemistry lab. So we had to move the retorts and all the experiments off the bema so we could bring the Torah out. I mean, things have changed dramatically and all for the better. But the fact that it was difficult to be a Jew, as you know the old saying, it was difficult being a Jew, that made it easier. That bound us together more than if it were really easy to be a Jew. But being a Jew was never far from my mind, but I was a soldier first and foremost.
So if not that, then what was your experience and what was going through your mind when you did receive that auspicious decoration? And you mentioned that you always think about so many of those who never got the opportunity for those 4 reasons. But aside from that, was there any, what was the thoughts going through your mind?
Well, I mean, I was a young kid still. I was only, I think I was 24 at the ceremony. I wasn't quite 23 when I was engaged in my action. And one of the things that goes through your mind is that how humble you are, because you're representing all those kids, all those friends of yours who never came back. But I also did think about the fact that I was one of the few Jews recognized. We've had quite a few Jewish Medal of Honor recipients, most of them killed in action, and that I represented not just them, but the Jewish community. And that's a very powerful thing. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. And it's, the day after I was decorated, there were 4 of us who were decorated in the same ceremony from the Army, but in different actions, but we were all decorated together. And interestingly, we're the only people decorated in the same ceremony who are still alive, all 4 of us. So we're not all that young anymore. In any case, they scheduled the ceremony to coincide with the biennial get-together of the Medal of Honor recipients, who that year were meeting in Houston. And at that time, there were 400 living recipients. They put us on Air Force One the very next day and took us down to Houston in time for the gala dinner, which culminated the meeting of the Medal of Honor recipients. And the people in the room were all household names. Audie Murphy and Joe Foss and Admiral O'Kane. And there was a living recipient named Bill Seach, who had conducted a bayonet charge on the Citadel at Beijing in 1900 in the Boxer Rebellion. He was still there, and so on. In any case, I'll try to adumbrate all this. At the end of the dinner, Jimmy Doolittle came up to me. Jimmy Doolittle led the one-way suicide mission to bomb Tokyo in 1942 to demonstrate to the Japanese that we were coming back, that, in the words of Yamamoto, they unleashed a tiger. And Yamamoto argued strenuously that they shouldn't bomb Pearl Harbor. He led it anyway because he was the boss, but he said this is a really bad idea. And it turned out to be a really bad idea for the Japanese. Jimmy Doolittle, who at the time was a retired 3-star general and who was a household name, came up to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and took me to the corner of the ballroom. And he said, "Young man, let me tell you something. You're no longer Jack Jacobs. You're Jack Jacobs Medal of Honor recipient, and you better comport yourself accordingly do you understand what I am telling you? I said, yes, sir, I sure do. It was then that it occurred to me, more so than during the ceremony, which I can barely remember. It occurred to me that I represented all those people who performed valiantly and were not recognized, particularly those who didn't come back, but also that I represented all Jews, not just those who were in service, but all those. I represented American Jews, and I better comport myself accordingly.
That actually very much leads into what my next question was going to be, which is Medal of Honor recipients. It's kind of like an Academy Award or Olympian. Once it occurs, you are that for the rest of your life, and you've led a life as a Medal of Honor recipient. So, are you able to give some insight into what that experience has been like?
Well,
journey.
It's very difficult to avoid being a professional Medal of Honor recipient, especially since there were 400 or so when I was decorated, and now there are only 61 of us. And we're a wasting asset. So the demands on your time are substantial, and it's difficult. I tell newly minted Medal of Honor recipients all the same thing, and have for almost 60 years. You've got to be judicious about your time, and you're going to feel the weight of the medal. Some recipient in the past has said it's harder to wear the medal than it is to earn it in the first place, because you're going to feel the responsibility of representing all people who've worn the uniform at everything, and you're going to get lots and lots of requests to show up at various events. You're going to meet yourself coming and going, and you're going to have to learn to make judicious decisions about how you spend your time. Some recipients don't do anything. They don't go anywhere. Now's the case. A lot of them don't go because they can't go. I mean, of the 60 recipients, only about 30 of us can get up, can wander around under our own power and so on. So the demands are especially heavy. Others try to do everything. They say yes to everything and find that that's a very bad course of action. I mean, they can't do it, and then despair of ever being able to make a contribution. But if you're selective about what you say yes to and what you say no to, then you can, in fact, make a substantial contribution by talking to kids in school, poisoning young minds, which I love to do, disappraising the rubbish that they hear elsewhere, and so on, and really having an impact on future kids, in particular kids. So I talk to schools and colleges and universities. I talk to corporate headquarters all the time, who are also misinformed about most things, and try to give them the benefit of my opinion on just about everything. But it's difficult to go from being Joe Schmo, soldier, to being somebody people want to listen to. It's very difficult to do, and you have to be smart about what you select to do.
And on you as your person and your esteem, what has that done to you?
Well, it certainly makes you humble, to be recognized, because you know that there are other people who should be recognized who are not, for all the reasons I enumerated. There's a Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam named Brian Thacker, who once very wistfully, when he was getting interviewed, he's still alive, said, there are 3 grieving mothers still whose sons were every bit as brave that day. And you reflect on all the bravery of the people who should have been recognized but were not. That makes the burden extremely heavy, and the older you get, the heavier it gets. You're representing all those ghosts who aren't here now. You don't think about that as much when you're young, but you do when you get older.
You also mentioned in the room 400 recipients, and so many of them are household names. And if you watch the old Johnny Carson episodes, you see references to these sorts of men, which today people wouldn't even know probably who is leading the U.S. Armed Forces.
No.
How have you seen that degradation, and what do you think the reason is for all of that?
Well, we've made the politically expedient decisions, as I mentioned, to sort of decouple ourselves, decouple society from the efforts of people who make that society possible. It's easy to do for now. I hate to think what'll happen if that's tested, but it's easy to do. Like I said, it's a big mistake. You know, I'm reminded of an observation of John Stuart Mill in that regard. And this is not exactly what he said, but it's something. He said, war is a terrible thing, but it's not the worst of things. He said, a man for whom nothing is more important than his own safety is a miserable creature who's made free and kept free by the exertions of better men than he. That's what we have today. We forget that, but we forget it. We forget it at our peril. Dangerous situation to rely on other people's efforts.
I think a lot in those sort of statements about Israel and about so many of my mates that are living their lives in miliwims, in reserve duty, going in and out and in and out, but it being nature, because their danger is right outside their door. It's quite literally able to come over the border at any moment. Whereas over here in, free-loving America or Australia and most Western countries, we don't have that existential momentary fear, but rather this idea of a big enemy could one day be there. So are you able to talk a little bit on what you think that shift in mindset has been? Because as you said, Pearl Harbor, it shifted the country, whereas the things happening today don't.
Well, but before Pearl Harbor, we had the same notion that you're talking about. Well, it's far away. The president himself said, Asian boys will fight in Asia, European boys will fight in Europe. And by the time we finally ended the war in Europe had been going on for 2.5 years. War in Asia had been going on for an entire decade. People were getting slaughtered on 2 continents, but we had the same short-sighted view of our own safety in 1939 as we do today. It's far away. Nobody's going to bother us. China is at many levels of analysis is a clear and present danger. And yet we are not very thoughtful about how we need to make sure that we remain safe and our interests remain supported in areas that are far away from the United States. Israel lives in a very dangerous neighborhood. And so it's easy for Israel to make plans to defend itself when it's in an environment like it's been since 1948. Israel's had to live with these dangers for its entire life. We're very complacent. Everything's okay. Then if it's not okay, a miracle will happen and then everything will be okay again. That's been our experience. Ever since World War I, it was like that before. It was like that today. We do that at our great peril. I'm not suggesting that we'd be a lot better off if we were living in an environment in which Canada and Mexico would be attacking us all the time. Yeah. But I have to say that we have an unrealistic view of what our dangers are, and we haven't prepared for them. And we are unfortunately not, we're already not liking the result. We're really not going to like it if we persist on being blind to what our obligations as a nation and as individual citizens, if we're blind to those obligations.
For young kids that are looking to serve, and many Jewish kids go to the IDF, but many also do serve the United States. Are you able to talk to them and what you think the importance is of defending a nation like the United States, which we all live in and enjoy the freedoms of?
Well, I mean, there's the first order issue of what your obligation is. Like I said, you're looking at somebody who believes in universal service. I think if you're an American, you must serve. That's all there is to it. We have mitzvot, and that's one of them. In my view, that's one of them. You owe something to this country that's giving you the freedom to do whatever you want, and you got to pay it. You got to pay it back by making your contribution. You can't just take. You got to make a contribution. You got to pay a little bit too. But there's a practical aspect about it too. I talk to CEOs all the time, and I ask them, you hiring veterans? And they all have programs. We're going to hire veterans. We've hired 5,000 veterans since 9/11 and so on. And I asked them, I said, why do you do that? And the majority of them would say the same thing, because we owe it to them. Well, I said, it's baloney. That's not why you should do it. Certainly not why you should do it. Maybe it's why you think you're doing it, but that's not why you should do it. You should do it because these are the best people you can find anywhere. There is nothing like military service that gives young people authority and responsibility at an early age. When people get out of the service, however long it's been, they've had more authority and responsibility than the majority of the people who were thinking about hiring them in the first place. I mean, when people are in uniform, you've got 19, 20-year-old people who are in charge of everything in the lives of a dozen men. I mean, my father was a little bit older when he served in the Army in the Second World War. He was a sergeant, fought in New Guinea and the Philippines. His troops called him the old man. He was 26. Everybody else was 18, 19, 20 years old. When you've been in an environment, whether it's in combat or not, when you're responsible for everything in the lives of other people, when you're given missions and told more or less how to do it, but you're going to have to figure it out. When you're told to go do something, when you get there, turn right, and you get there and you can't turn right, and you got to figure out in a moment whether or not you're going to turn left, and you go ahead and do it. You develop the kind of thought process, the ability to make decisions on short notice with minimal information. You get a feeling that you can, in fact, do anything if you put your mind to it and think clearly about it. You turn out to be a very much different person after your service than somebody who's been sitting around contemplating his navel for the same period of time. I mean, you're the man. And when I talk to CEOs and CFOs about hiring veterans, I remind them that's the reason you're supposed to hire these people, because they're probably going to be better at your job than you are. And furthermore, they're quick studies. I mean, here's what you got to do. Do you know how to do it? No, but I'll figure it out. That's what happens when you're in uniform. And that's not the principal reason why you need to put the uniform on, but that's a concomitant of doing that. It's an additional benefit. you go in being 19 years old and you come out 46 years old and able to do anything that you're given.
And on that note of going in and being in service, what is your thoughts on the progression of Jewish needs being accommodated and the way that organizations like Aleph take care of Jews in the military so that you can be religious in the military?
Well, that's one of the great things Aleph and others have managed to accomplish. Look, it was always, like I said, if your heart and your head is in Judaism, then Judaism is always with you. But it's lots easier being a Jew in service now than it ever was before, and it's getting better all the time. And it's all because of organizations like Aleph. I mean, we've decided, yes, we're soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and so on, but we're also Jews. We want to make it easy to be. If you're going to make it easy to be a Jew, then it's all to the good. You can't take Judaism out of a Jew, but you're going to make it a heck of a lot easier for it to be much more comfortable and easy to do. And that's what Aleph's done.
And you obviously came to a symposium last year. What did that do for you inside when you saw that many Jewish service members?
Well, you said it in one. You gave it in one. It was really quite astonishing to see all those Jews from everywhere converging all at the same time in the same place. It was A, mind-boggling and B, very, very satisfying. I came home and told my wife, Sue, you're not going to believe this. All these Jews from everywhere, and there they were all together. It was terrific, just terrific.
Did you get the chance to speak to some of the young service members?
A few. Well, I knew some of the kids from service academies and so on. Some of them I'd met before, but people from everywhere and all coming together. Yeah, I got the chance to talk to a few of them. And what did we talk about? I mean, the service members would talk about military things. Being a Jew, just a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to talk about service.
And how about seeing that many rabbis and big beards in uniform?
I didn't know there were so many all in one spot. I've had one rabbi, right? You see a few from time to time. And of course, going back in time, sometimes you had to be your own rabbi. My father's family was from Greece. They from Yanina, in northern Greece. They'd come from Judea 1,600 years ago as Roman slaves. Went to Greece and stayed there. But I mean, that's where they were. And my great grandfather, whom I remember very well, dressed up in a 3-piece suit every day, filling and had a long big beard, and he made sure that we got a proper Jewish education at a time when it was difficult, if not impossible, to do so. I'm talking about a long time ago. For him, I mean, he wasn't a rabbi, but he was a rabbi because he was my great-grandfather, and knew that coming from an environment in which it was difficult to be a Jew into an environment in which it was difficult to be a Jew, but only if you didn't pursue it. It was your fault if you were a proper Jew. He made sure that we were proper Jews. So seeing that many beards all at the same time, same place, it brought me back, 75 years, 80 years.
You said you connected to one Jewish chaplain in your time. How much of a difference did it make to you for your chaplain to be Jewish compared to the usual Christian or so on and so forth?
Well, it was very important. As a matter of fact, I grew up in an environment in the Army when there were very few Jewish chaplains, and they were not necessarily your chaplain. It's interesting to note that if your battalion chaplain was Catholic, for example, he understood completely what your requirements were. Seriously. And when I was in Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion Airborne, 505th Infantry as a lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division. Our battalion chaplain was a Catholic priest who had jumped into Normandy, as a matter of fact, and spoke pretty good Hebrew. Back at the time, I mean, I don't think the Catholic Church is the same now as it was back then, when particularly where he was from, you had to be able to you did the liturgy in Latin, not English, and you had to speak a certain amount of Hebrew as well
To read the Old Testament. Or
Correct. And
Torah.
that's not the, I'm not Catholic, so I don't know. I don't think that's the case anymore. But thankfully we've got lots of Jewish chaplains now.
Well, although I could sit and talk to you all day, I know how precious your time is. So I just want to say thank you very much for spending some time with me and for sharing those notions and spending your life being a Medal of Honor recipient and representing that for so many of us that get to appreciate and enjoy the Constitution.
Well, thanks for involving me. And, I could talk, since I've got an opinion on every subject, I could talk to you for the next 3 or 4 days without stopping. But thank you very much for involving me in all this.
Who's going to win the Super Bowl?
Oh God. I mean, I've missed I've been traveling, so I've missed watching, who are the top bananas now?
I should really ask you who's going to win the cricket if you've got it figured out everything.
Well, I used to go to the Oval. When I was at Bankers Trust, I was in London for part of the time. I spent most of my time on an airplane, but I was based there. My wife is English. I used to go to the Oval all the time. It's the greatest excuse for a picnic I've ever seen in my life. People say, "Isn't it boring?" I said, "No, it's great. It's enormous fun." I'll tell you something. Where we live here, we're out in the country in New Jersey. Not far from here, there's a racetrack, and there's a fairly substantial South Asian population around here. And in the summertime, there's a cricket league right there in the middle of the Oval.
Oh, really? I'll have to come.
And it's terrific. And I go down and when I'm around, go down and watch. Sundays you can watch cricket games.
Where I am in Brooklyn, there's a few that play at the park nearby, and so I walked up to them. I said, "Oh my God, is that cricket?" And so I'm like, "Oh, can I have a go?" I hold it like a baseball bat. The guy runs into bowl, and then suddenly I hit it off. I go, "You bloody idiots! I'm Aussie."
I love cricket. I love watching it. Don't get a chance to watch it except once in a while in the summertime right here where I live. Ironically.
Well, I'll have to come join you for one of those games.
It's a deal. It's a deal.
Thank you
Stay
very,
in touch.
very much.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.